Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the 27th of July 2021. I'd like to start by acknowledging we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We do have members on leave of absence this evening. Everyone, welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the 27th of July 2021. I'd like to start by acknowledging we meet on the lands. Okay. Yes, okay. Apologies that you had to hear that twice. So we have Councillor Susan Gontaszewski on approved leave of absence until the 8th of August, and I believe we had incorrectly recorded Councillor Josh Toppelberg on approved leave of absence until tomorrow, but welcome back, Councillor Toppelberg. Great to see you again. So we will go to public question time and receiving of public statements. Oh, wow. Hello. Welcome, everyone. You don't need to raise your hand. You can just come up to the microphone as you wish. There's no set order, but we just ask that you state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and if you could please stick to 3 minutes, that would be very much appreciated. So welcome to the first speaker.
Caroline Cohen, Gardner Street, the Banks Precinct. Speaking to item 10.3, and this is the community hall or pavilion down in Banks Reserve. We realise that we're probably pushing this barrow uphill, which makes us actually very sad as a community. There are so few facilities left like the Banks Precinct Hall. It is a very rare commodity. It has been the heart of our community over many years, and it has never been flooded, despite having the most rain currently since 1993. The bit that is flooded is Banks Reserve, and that happens nearly every year anyway. So please don't consider, because it's on a floodplain, that that's a problem. It's not been a problem yet in my time. Also, this building could not be easily replaced. The estimated cost of a new one is $2.5 million, and we really are quite realistic and think that this would never happen. So we would like to retain what we have. We would like people to invest, council to invest, individuals if we can get to invest of time, but the money could perhaps be generated through marketing, and we have done our best over the last few months. We have a lot of interest from people who would like to use this facility. So what we would like to suggest is that the City of Vincent propose through their marketing department to actually actively market this building. It is prime location on the Swan River. It really is a fabulous little venue. We have people who have used it, whether you refer to them as commercial users or not. A school uses community children to patronise it. We've got the yoga teacher is here again tonight. She spoke with you last week. There are many people who have used this facility over the years. We feel there were some flaws in the consultation process. People attended the workshops. At no stage on my table did anyone ever advocate from the community that this hall be knocked over. In fact, people were very proactive. We talked about where the current toilet block is and the garage where the caretaker used to sit and take out his lawnmower and eat his packed lunch, that actually that could be where Perth paddlers put their canoes. Perth paddlers are very interested in using this facility, but it was never said in my hearing that it would be knocked over. Then we received the draft master plan 2018, and there it is in the costing schedule that it was proposed to be demolished for $50,000, and a new building subject to business case or sustainability case could be built, but $2.5 million. This is a small town. We don't have that sort of income. Why can't we use what exists? It has every right to have a new life. So I am appealing to good sense to market it, promote it. We will go and weed it as a community because, goodness gracious, it doesn't take long for nature to take over. But I would hope that you will consider if you could even delay, defer is your terminology, this idea to to knock it over, we would appreciate that, because we do have a lot of interest. Leon Pericles sends his apologies. He couldn't be here tonight. A lot of community members cannot be here tonight. My phone has been really busy today. But just know that we are really keen to save the heart of our community. We're a small community. Please, please consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Next speaker, please.
Good evening. My name's Catherine Pynchon. I live in Joel Terrace, East Perth on Banks Precinct. I also wish to speak to 10.3 and the demolition of the community hall. I concur with everything Caroline said, and I'm not going to repeat it. I did have some questions about the consultation process. We have been heavily involved in that consultation process, and at no point was it discussed that the building would be demolished. And one of the things that the community hall or the community facility is exactly that. It is a very big draw card for the community. We are bounded by East Parade. It is very difficult to cross over. From East Parade, we have a young community coming through in Banks Precinct and a lot of older people. And it was said in one of our consultations by a councillor that they could all go over to Forest Street, to that hall. It's not actually that easy. It's very difficult to exit without proper transportation. It also fragments the community. At the moment, the Banks Reserve and the community hall brings the community together. We are also very concerned about your costings, saying that only 8% of the hall is used by the community. I have brought up my child in Banks Precinct. When he was little, he went to something at the hall on a regular basis, and it was paid for. It was a commercial enterprise, but I live across the road. I'm part of the community. I found it a very useful and helpful facility. He's had parties there. Even though they are commercial enterprises, we are still able to access them as a community. Equally with the yoga, there's a lot of elderly people that access this yoga facility. It is a commercial enterprise, I agree with that, but it is open to the community. And it is very, because it's in that sort of a hall, it's not overly expensive. It's not like going to a gymnasium. So I would urge you to consider that you're taking away not a hall, you're taking away the heart of our community. And on a final note, many years ago, I renovated my house and came through this council, and there was a lot of focus on reuse, recycle, retain. I have an old house and I did all of those things. I'm actually very surprised, especially in the current world that we live in, that the council is feeling that it's okay to discard something because maybe it's not beautiful, maybe it's not new. Gosh, where I'm heading in life, I'll be discarded soon on that basis. So I would urge you to look at the values of the council, which is actually well known for being environmentally friendly, and look at retaining what we can use and only discarding what has no value whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Next speaker, please.
My name is John Hockley. I live at 3 Leslie Street, Mount Lawley, and I've been involved with the Banks Precinct for many years. Some people on the council remember the name Tony Discerni. Tony Discerni was a real person to me. He was my neighbour. He was also one of the heads of the Banks Precinct. I've been head of it for quite a few years. I attended all the meetings at Banks Reserve, and in the groups that I was with, the demolition of the hall wasn't mentioned, and I attended every one of those meetings. And what I'd also like to do is to re-emphasise and reiterate what the other and endorse what the other speakers have said. We'd like this hall. The hall has got a very good floor on it, very well sprung. It's very useful for ballet, for young girls to learn ballet, and it's been a great success at that. It can still be used for that. We have doubts about your costings, about maintenance of this hall, and what we ask is that you have a stay and give us a chance to see if we can't get together as a community and see if we can make it work and useful. It is a very useful community asset. It's a rare one. Once it's knocked down, we'll never get another one. And that's what we asked for. And when you deal with item 10.3, please give some consideration to those aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Next speaker, please.
Good evening again. I'm Wendy Herring. I live in Guildford, but prior to the closure of Banks, I taught a couple of classes a week at Banks Reserve. And in the past week, I've had the opportunity to speak to about 20 of my students that just happen to be ratepayers of yours. Okay, and it got me thinking, because July in Guildford is when rates come out. And I, as a long-term resident in Guildford, worked out that I've probably paid over $50,000 in rates over the last 27 years I've lived in Guildford. So these long-term ratepayers of yours that you elected to speak for them and be a community-minded team for them to make the right choices. All I hear from people that I speak to from Lilac Hill all the way through here is the council's pull down toilets. They don't consider things like on a 40-degree day that you might need an old toilet block to get some respite from the heat or shelter from the rain. And they're just building these little constructions that collect the heat and nothing other than a toilet. So I just thought I'd draw that to your attention. And apart from getting their garbage collected and parks looked after, I think they deserve a little bit more of your attention. I really feel that when the fear subsides, people are going to come out of their houses again, and they're going to need community and connection more than ever. And if you take away this space, I fear that it's really going to upset many people, your ratepayers that have supported you all this time. So I'd really like you to bear in mind, you've heard what everyone else has said, I agree wholeheartedly, and that when you make that decision about Banks Reserve Pavilion's future, that you might like to be remembered as the council that brought Banks and the community back together again, and not the council that destroyed the whole community and this beautiful space that people go to for a very good reason. So thank you for listening to me, and I really hope that you have heard my words tonight, because I don't know what else to say. So thank you, I appreciate your ears.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Next speaker, please.
Hi there, my name's Andrew Martin and I live at 104 Joel Terrace, 50 metres from the hall. And I speak sadly on behalf of 104A and 102 and 100, and none of us have ever complained about the noise of the parties or anything else. We enjoy seeing the hall being used in 21st birthday parties, Christmas parties, and we want the hall to stay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Kirsten Goy and I'm the resident of 55 Ruth Street, Perth. I'm speaking to agenda item 9.3, 7 grams chicken odor nuisance. Firstly, I would like to extend my gratitude to the administration of the City of Vincent and also the council that are involved in helping us with the nuisance odor issue in relation to 7 grams chicken in Lake Street. It appears that it is not an easy problem to resolve as one would have thought. I understand that this is a compliance matter for the administration to deal with. However, I'm speaking to you today as I believe there are points to consider for the Council for future policy changes. To summarize, we are subjected to the smell of rancid cooking oil and fried chicken 10 hours per day, 6 days a week. It has become a nuisance impacting our daily lives. We understand from the administration that the premises was licensed as a cafe restaurant and that 7 grams falls into the same classification. This is, in my opinion, where the problem begins. 7 grams prepares predominantly one ingredient, being chicken, using a single method of preparation, being deep frying. Where this currently doesn't classify as fast food under the Town Planning Scheme number 2, common sense would suggest that this is not in line with a cafe and/or restaurant. Fast food outlets require a special permission from Council for Mixed Zones. This was not required in this case, and I would urge you to consider the definition of fast food under the planning scheme. I'm sure that the administration would have viewed application from any of the major fast food chains differently, and the difference here is not the existence of a drive-through. The odor emissions would be similar. Commercial food cooking is known as a source of air pollutants, including gases and tiny solid particles. In case of 7-gram chicken, this is very evident by the blackened roof tiles around the flue. Something needs to change now and for the future. At this time in our lives, we all have to deal with difficult circumstances, naming COVID-19, where more people are working from home and business have to adapt to cater for these changes. Planning guidelines and codes are not up to standard for today's circumstances and need to change. In times of these, with soaring popularity of food delivery services, more restaurants are popping up in mixed residential areas, compounding the problem. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. You've raised a very interesting point about the use and whether fast food is appropriate. We'll follow that up. Next speaker, please.
My name's Lindley Cohen and I live at 59 Ruth Street in Perth, and I'm speaking to item 9.3. Just firstly, I've lived in the neighbourhood since 1980, so clearly the lifestyle suits me. And in all that time, I've never been impacted by the emission of offensive odour from any of the nearby cafes, restaurants or hotels. The health impact of the ambient air pollution is both physical and mental. It limits my opportunity to enjoy my home. I can no longer sit in my courtyard and have a cup of coffee because all I can smell is the cloying odour of fried chicken, which drives me inside to close all my doors and windows. I do appreciate for the past 8 months, both the city and business owners have been working to mitigate the emission of nuisance odours, but to date this has been futile, so something seems to be missing here. It's now coming up to 12 months, and what I'm really concerned about is that ultimately council would say that there's nothing more can be done to alleviate the odour, and that we just have to learn to live with it. And for residents, a compromise like this is not acceptable. The bad smell really has to be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindley. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Antoinette Jaja and I live at 41 Ruth Street, and I'm speaking to item 9.3 as well. I second everything Lindley has said. We live probably east of Lindley. She lives closest to 7 grams, and we smell that smell every day for 10 hours a day. It is very impactful on our lives. We can't use our backyard in the middle of the day when they're cooking up their fried chicken. I want to speak to the point of fast food. If Amy Street is not being used as a waiting queue for takeaway chicken, I don't know what is. I would recommend, and I would like to think that the council would bring people into Amy Street, stand there for half an hour and tell me that taxis and Deliveroos and Ubers and whoever they are not standing there and waiting to take food away. They may not be driving through, but they are certainly waiting, and they are parking in front of our parking areas. They're parking in front of our driveways. That's not my biggest concern. They come and they go. It's that definition of fast food. And yes, I would enjoy a nice chicken burger like anybody else, but this place, and I think the business owners are victims here as well. I think our problem started before they moved into the premises. I think the council needed to have done a lot more regulation checking and meeting requirements of the council before they were allowed to move in. However, it is where it is now, 12 months down the track. And I think more effort and possibly a few more visits to the area to understand the impact it has on us. And I know the odour specialist is coming in and is checking it around, but there's a number of things that impact us. So I'd like to submit my comments to you, and hopefully my words have resounded somewhat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antoinette. Next speaker.
Dudley Meyer from Highgate. I've got 4 questions and then a brief statement. Question 1, what council workshops have been held since the 22nd of June 2021 and what items were presented at each workshop? Question 2, who collects the waste from this admin building? And if it's a private contractor, when did they start collecting it? Question 3, have all businesses been contacted as requested by council before their bins were removed? And what documentary evidence of this has been retained? Question 4, in early 2020, Maori Slythe and members of the Cleaver community nominated to have parts of the area recognised as a character retention area. It's 18 months later and this still hasn't been progressed. People are starting to give up. My question is, when will the staff look at this? Why has this been delayed? Is it because staff shortages or other priorities? To item 10.3, the Banks Reserve Pavilion. As I mentioned in my email to councillors, I ask that you do not make a de facto decision on the pavilion's demolition tonight, and that you give Leon Pericles and the community a chance to demonstrate the alternative of keeping the pavilion in some form. There's no rush to demolish the pavilion. You're just going to replace it with grass, and there's no shortage of grass or open space in that area, so there's no benefit. Of concern is the fact that the staff continually underestimate or understate the utilisation of the pavilion by ignoring the fact that it was not available to the community or the broader community between 7:30 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. So the actual utilisation, the non-kiddies utilisation was much higher. I also question the assertion that the pavilion should go because it runs at a loss. Other halls run at a loss. The library runs at a massive loss, as does Beatty Park, and you're not going to get rid of them. What is particularly distressing is the fact that the staff suggest that if people from the Banks precinct want to do something like yoga with Wendy, they can drive to Leederville or Mount Hawthorn because Menzies Pavilion is available. That is mind-boggling. Also of concern is the fact that they did not address the Lycopodium condition report as requested by the Mayor last week. It's not in the report. Leon has demonstrated broad community support. He's got 446 signatures, which is more than the 387 signatures for the retention of the dental clinic back in, I think it was February. And you did a 180-degree turnaround on that one. I'd ask you to do the same here. Leon's well known in the arts community and should be given a chance to develop the proposal or develop a proposal. For all you know, it might be become an arts hub, the sort of thing that lots of people have been discussing for a number of years. I think he should be given the chance. He may not succeed, but give him the chance. I think you've got nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Thanks, Dudley. Next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors, CEO, other members of staff. I'm Ross Iplo from Leederville. I'm here again for agenda item 3.2's petition, seeking a ban on verge parking on a portion of Vincent Street due to safety issues. I understand council will be voting on the issue this evening. My one question is constructive in nature, and it is being asked with the utmost respect. The administration, as I understand, has recommended to support that ban, acknowledged it represents a safety risk, and has the delegated authority to make that decision by signposting the area so verge parking is prohibited in this particular part of Vincent Street. Why, and I'm relieved about that, why could that decision not have been made by administration over the last 7 months without the need for residents like myself to seek an outcome via petition and then bringing it to council's attention? In the same way, my petition was accompanied by questions designed to understand specifically the rationale about why current parking regulations do not prohibit verge parking where it creates an obstacle. Things would have been more efficient and simpler if those questions could have been satisfactorily answered with direct engagement with administration. So really what I'm getting to is what could I have done differently in my approach to seek clarity on policy and a desired outcome without having to go to such lengths. Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. We'll come to those questions when we deal with your item. Are there any further speakers this evening?
Hi, good evening. My name is Nick Chunchi. I own property on Franklin Street, Leederville, adjoining number 14 Franklin Street. In addition to my comments at last week's briefing session, I just wanted to speak more broadly about the development in general. So I understand in assessment of this development application, the obvious planning elements are being assessed. And then obviously with that, there's some variations to consider. So it's a very structured approach. I understand that in planning. And so we're just checking boxes and perhaps being a little bit short-sighted in looking at this development. Obviously, there's been no objections to the development in general. Everyone wants to see the current situation with the old house gone. So there's no objections there. I think there's a bit of a short-sighted approach in the assessment of the application based on looking at the setbacks and addressing the variations and then putting it out for community consultation. So since February, I think when this application came in, it's been in and out of community consultation a couple of times. And obviously the applicant's been dealing with the city at length since then. It's concerning that this development hasn't been looked at for the scale of what it is. We're creating three lots, which is on an R30 site, which is fine. But these dwellings are 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom homes. I have a wife and 2 kids myself, and these homes are probably too large for even us to live in. I think, you got the R codes and then you've got your built form policy. And my understanding is this policy's been designed to go over and above the R codes and look at whether this type of development actually suits this residential area. I think this development could have still had 3 dwellings on it in a much smaller scale, still have family homes created, and possibly not have these variations to the design principles and not affect residents and property owners like myself in such a way. And to be honest, me and the other adjoining landowner are really the only ones who are affected by this development. Everyone else, really, it's just a matter of the streetscape and how it looks. And it looks great, in my opinion. But yeah, I do really have an issue about how this has been assessed and the size of these homes. The scale of each home is what you would see in suburbs like Coolbinia on maybe a 700 square metre block. And just quickly, there was a comment regarding additional scope for tree planting from Councillor Hallett last week. That's all of a sudden became a conditional approval that extra trees be planted on the verge adjacent to this lot, which again affects me as the adjoining lot owner when I...
Nick, you are going well over time. If you wouldn't mind concluding, it would be
I'll
much
wrap it up.
appreciated.
Just with that, it's, when I go to put a new crossover in, I have to stay away a certain distance away from these trees. I think putting that in as a design conditional approval is a bit of a parachute one, I think. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any further speakers?
Thank you, everybody, for giving us the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking to the Banks Reserve Hall. 10-3, I think it is, Ian Rawlings from Pakenham, 15 Pakenham Street in Mount Lawley. Just reiterating the points that have been made, and particularly making the point that Banks Precinct is significantly isolated from the rest of Vincent in that it's cut off by both Guildford Road and Railway Parade, East Parade, I should say. And access to other facilities is incredibly difficult. To suggest that particularly the elderly residents go to other parts of Vincent to undertake different exercise and community activities is completely impractical, and it is the only facility that we have in the neighbourhood, and there is no potential for anything else being put in its place to replace it if it is destroyed, if it is demolished. So I just like to make that point, that it is a valued asset in our community, very strongly so, and one that will be sorely missed and irreplaceable, essentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any further speakers? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your comments and questions and for your attendance this evening. It is much appreciated. So I'll now close public question time and move on to...
Through Mayor Cole.
Oh, yes, sorry, we've also had some questions received in writing.
Thanks. Yes, we have two questions submitted. One from Mr. Iapolo have circulated on email, so I won't read that out if that's okay. But the other one is from Chris Kingslyn in Mount Hawthorn, who asks what is going to be done about the regular floods occurring from 89 to 97 East Street in Mount Hawthorn. We've reported floods in 2010, twice in 2016, 2017, and now twice in 2021. The floods in 2010, 2016, and 2021 entered and destroyed the interior of properties. There is obvious stormwater overflow from the higher areas surrounding that is being offloaded to our street from Purslow, Aegina, Berryman, and Federation. We have observed that drainage is missing or inadequate and usually blocked in those uphill streets.
Thank you, Jordan. Director, do you have any comments this evening on the flooding?
Yeah, through McCall, I can assist council with that. So we are aware of the issue. We've already spoken to the gentleman. Meeting occurred this week, and we've committed to undertaking a hydrology report to see what the city can do to resolve the flooding issues. We recognise it as a problem, and that engagement has already started.
Thank you, Director. Okay, and just noting in the agenda, we do have response to previous public questions taken on notice. So those responses are there in the agenda in writing. Director, you have something that you look really keen to speak.
I'm keen. Mr. Meyer asked a question that I can answer right now. So if you'd like me to do that.
Yep, that's fine. Let's go ahead.
He asked about the Cleaver Precinct character retention areas and those nominations. We're very aware of that issue. We've had a large number of we've had half a dozen to a dozen nominations, character retention area nominations. The team has been progressing those in order of receipt. Our priority has been the large projects that we've had on the books for a number of years. So the Lidl Activity Centre plan, the Accessible Cities strategy, the community engagement strategy. We recently progressed the character retention area proposals in Mount Hawthorn. So I'm pleased to say that we're now ready to initiate those character retention areas in Cleaver Precinct, and they'll be coming to council very shortly. So that work's been done now, completed. So hopefully council will see that in the next month.
Good news. Thank you, Director. Applications for leave of absence. Are there any applications for leave? Okay. Moving on then to item 5, the receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. We have received a petition from Mr Leon Pericles with 446 signatures requesting that council stop the demolition of Banks Reserve Pavilion. We've all received this petition in writing and we have the record of it in the agenda. And we just need a notice, we need a motion from council this evening to receive the petition and to deal with the petition this evening. So can I have a mover and seconder to receive the petition and deal with the petition at this meeting? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Wallace. All those in favour? I declare that carried. And that we will deal with that item as item 10.3, and that will be the first item that we deal with, given that that was the first item raised during public question time. Now moving on to confirmation of minutes, item 6. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 22nd of June 2021. Can I please have a mover and seconder for the confirmation of minutes? Moved by Councillor Hallett, seconded by Councillor Fotakis. All those in favour? Thank you. I declare the minutes adopted. Announcements by the presiding member. Very quickly, just a few things to note that we're about to commence public consultation on the Britannia Reserve West master plan. That is something that we have been aiming to do for some years, working with the club to reach agreement on a federal government grant that is not yet secured but is promised to the club. And we have now a concept that is agreed by the club and council, and we're looking forward to getting that out there for community consultation. And we also have an expression of interest out for artists to provide percent for art funded sculpture in Leederville and a lighting installation in Northbridge. And Oxford Street is about to get some new red asphalt in the town centre. So just a bit of a range of some of the things that's happening out there. Declarations of interest, I'll hand over you to CEO. You've got a few there.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Cole. As listed in the agenda papers, Councillor Smith declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 12.2, the Audit Committee meeting minutes, the extent of the interest being that her husband is a member of the Audit Committee. Councillor Smith declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 11.1 on event and festival funding, noting that she worked with one of the participants. She has also worked with the director of the Rev Film Festival at Upbeats Events and serves on the Arts Advisory Council with her. Councillor Smith also declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 9.1, 14 Franklin Street, proposed 3 group dwellings. The extended interest being that she knows the owner of 12 Franklin Street as a school parent through her son's junior and senior school years. Councillor Fotakis declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 9.1 as well. The extent of the interest being that she was an employee of the same employer as the owner of 12 Franklin Street. Councillor Fotakis declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 11.1 on event and festival funding. The interest being that she knows and served on council with a member of one of the applicants. She also serves on the Arts Advisory Group with one of the festival directors. Councillor Toppelberg declared an interest in relation to item 9.3, the petition response, noting that he's previously provided images to the Executive Director of Strategy and Development relating to the installation of the new flue. Mayor Cole, I declared 2 impartiality interests, the first being in relation to 9.3, the 7 grams chicken petition, noting that I'm acquainted with one of the petitioners or one of the signatories to the petition. And also I declared an impartiality interest in relation to item 11.1 on event and festival funding, noting that I'm a former board member of Open House Perth, and I note that I was not involved in the application assessment process, and I did not authorise this report to council specifically. That's all, Mayor Cole.
Thank you, CEO. So in relation to items already needing to be dealt with this evening, we have items 9.1, 9.3, 10.4 and 11.1. In addition to those items, Councillor Hallett, do you wish to bring any forward for discussion? Councillor Castle, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Fotakis, Councillor Loden.
10.1.
10.1. Councillor Toppelberg.
10.2,
And we need to do 12.2 as well.
12.2? Yep. And councillor Smith? Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I will now read out the item numbers of those items that are being proposed to be moved en bloc, which include item 9.2, the draft Woodville Reserve Landscape Plan, 11.2 investment report, 11.3 financial statements, 11.4 authorisation of expenditure, 12.1 elected members, professional development, and 12.3 the information bulletin.
Can I please have a mover and seconder to move the en bloc items? Moved by councillor Fotakis, seconded by councillor Castle. All those in favour? Declare those carried. So the first item that we're dealing with, given that we deal with the items first that have been raised by members of the public in public question time and in the order that they are raised, is item 10.3, and that is the response to petition demolition of Banks Reserve Pavilion. Can I please have a mover and seconder? Move councillor Wallace, seconded councillor Loden.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. So I was elected to council a couple of years ago now, not long after the toilet block in my local park, Birdwood Square, was demolished as part of the city's program of asset rationalisation, the intent of which was to reduce the building asset maintenance costs in the face of pretty difficult budget and financial planning circumstances, which is something that the city is still dealing with today. It rankled me a bit at the time, although I've seen firsthand the amenity improvements that come with not living adjacent to a public toilet. But as I'm personally of the view that public toilets, community halls and the like are essential public infrastructure and one of the most basic items that a local government is responsible for providing to its community. Usage statistics, hire fees and items like that are all valid considerations when deciding to allocate the city's finite resources, but I do see a lot of value in retaining nominally underutilized spaces that are just there. Personally, a lot of what I enjoy and value in Vincent happens in these kind of underutilized fringes of public and private spaces. I think about the arts and cultural spaces that have organically grown in the formerly industrial space, like the Pickle District, and all the little random events and pop-ups I've been to at places like the North Perth Town Hall. I think it's really important to have such spaces in a community where groups and individuals who aren't solely motivated by profit can exist. So on that point, I acknowledge that the very low usage statistics of the pavilion and that there are similarly low usage rates in our other community halls, but don't agree that this alone is cause to demolish the building. Regarding the pavilion itself, I have to respectfully disagree with the petition that it is a beautiful building, although it's certainly not without its charms, including its internal wooden floors and ceiling beams and the high-level north-facing windows. Externally, though, the building is somewhat of a fortress, turning in on itself and presenting as a series of blank facades to the surrounding park and river. I've read and heard a lot of stories from people who've used and loved the building and have a great deal of respect for them and their relationship to the space. But I think what makes me disinclined to support this petition is the recent changes that I've seen at Banks Reserve as a result of the implementation of the first parts of the master plan out there. I think this city executed the design and installation of the play, skate and basketball areas really well. And I think more than ever, the Vincent community views the reserve as a place where they'd like to spend time. I think the only part we didn't get right in that process is the toilets, but in some way, the new facilities being a victim of their own success. So that really gives me optimism about what we can achieve in this space going forwards. I'm also optimistic about the future redevelopment of the adjacent power station precinct, but note that as a private and profit-driven venture, it's unlikely to include a public space like the pavilion currently provides. I do think there's some tension here between proposing demolition of a facility in part due to the required maintenance spending and budget constraints, while pointing to a currently unfunded master plan as the facility's replacement. But I think that's where we are in the pavilion's life cycle. Money needs to be spent here either way, and because of that, we're in a position of needing to make a decision on the long-term future of the space. On that basis, I'm of the view to accept administration's report and note that it includes plans to remove the pavilion this year. I do wholeheartedly, though, support the ongoing implementation of the Reserve Master Plan and hope that we can work into the upcoming discussions of the city's long-term financial plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of queries. In the gallery, there was a challenge raised around the 8% utilisation once you excluded the Learning Hub participants. And I was just wondering if there was details around the timeframe when that was measured and if you had any information on who those people are. I recognise this probably would have been more useful last week.
Through Mayor Cole, the 8% figure was a snapshot from 2018 that was included in the report from March in 2019 when the master plan was finally adopted by council. It wasn't, I don't believe it was intended to be used as a determining factor in what happens with the facility. From what I found, it was used as a response to comments from the community, which were essentially just asking for those figures. So it was a more informed decision.
Thank you. The other challenge was around the costings. I believe that's for the $50,000 that's required to bring the facility up to code. And if you had any more information you could share around what that involves and why it is $500,000.
Yeah, through Mayor Cole. So that was work done as part of the master plan. The building was looked at in light of inspections, including the Lycopodium report that was referred to in the public area. I can answer that question now because the Lycopodium report says that the building is in overall fair to poor condition, so not great condition. So that work was done. It needed renewal and upgrade, and including things like accessible doorways, accessible toilets, which are not currently accessible. And the estimate was $500,000 to bring that up. You know, all the work's required. There is quite a bit of asbestos in the building as well. So with an upgrade, we would do that at the same time.
One of the challenges, I guess, also raised was around the environmental impacts and retaining and reusing buildings. And I was wondering, we do demolish the facility, what would the city propose to do with the waste materials that are produced?
It's very much call. Yeah, we accept that demolishing a building, you know, is not great for the environment, and those materials are deconstructed. But every building that we've demolished, the material does go to a recycling plant, and things like wood, brick, and certainly metal are recovered. So we recover as much as we can.
Thank you. I support the officer recommendation as to note these documents. I realise this isn't what the community is asking for, the people that have shown up here, and that's disappointing. I also fully acknowledge that it's challenging to say that we are going to get a new building here at 2.1, I think it's $2.1 million. That is a significant cost, and that is, unless something changes significantly, unlikely to happen in the short to medium term, I would say. So that if we are saying that if we should not be expecting that is going to happen. But I think that the plaza and the space that we're going to create here is going to be a usable space, and it's going to be used in other ways by the community. And I think it will still provide a value there as well. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. Got a few questions. So through you to the Director of Infrastructure and Environment. So the $500,000 that's proposed as the cost of retain, it says retain and renew, but then the wording says to bring it to a reasonable standard. What would the $500,000 get if that was to be spent?
So through you, Nicole, without having the exact estimate in front of me, but we would typically renew the toilets, the kitchen, and bring them up to standard. So if there was accessibility issues, that would be corrected at that time. The asbestos would be removed. The place will be decorated and any structural issues that we found along the way done as well. So it will be bright. If you think of the work that we've done, elected members will know better than perhaps in the public gallery, but if you think the work that we've done in the hall in Mount Hawthorn and North Perth Town Hall, those are the typical sort of toilet standards and kitchen standards that we would bring our buildings up to.
Okay.
If we do that work now.
Would it include air conditioning?
Through your recall, I've said I've not got the estimate with me. There was an old air conditioning system in there that was deemed end of life. So I suppose I'd be guessing, but yes, we wouldn't leave a building like that without air conditioning. So.
Okay, so scenario 2 that's presented, it's got $210,000 listed as the life cycle cost, and that says no, that says, so the asbestos left in the building, no air conditioning, but the cost over 4 years would be $210,000. What's the $210,000 cost over the 4 years? Which I assume is, so 50.
Yeah, so scenario 2 is a scenario where, if correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a scenario where we partly demolish the building and we retain the whole.
No, it's defer demolition. So retain the pavilion in its current state for a period of time. And so it says $210,000 over 4 years, which is $55,000 per year, but no asbestos removal, no air conditioning. I'm just wondering what the $55,000 a year cost is if it says it doesn't have any allowance for utility charges, capital renewal or waste collection.
Sorry, I'm just catching up with the scenario, excuse me. So that's cleaning and vandalism at $25,000 a year. So that's an annual cost. There is $20,000 estimate to bring the building back into use. So that's electrical, some minor electrical works, bringing the kitchen back into use and some repairs. You have to remember that the building's been partly stripped. So the old kitchen's gone and the electrical supply's been cut off. So there's $20,000 to put that right. And we've also removed some of the asbestos in things like tiling that's easy to remove. So we'd have to make good those areas. So that's $20,000 to bring it back into use, $25,000 a year for cleaning and repairs, maintenance, and then ultimately a $90,000 demolition in 4 years' time.
So the $210,000 that's quoted in scenario 2 includes the $90,000 demolition at the end of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And just going back to this may be a question for the Director of Community and Business or perhaps even for the CEO, but the question about that pocket of Vincent, where do people go for indoor space to gather as community, or what provision does council have? My understanding is that some of the responses have been effectively to get in the car and have to drive to somewhere. What's proposed as part of the master plan in terms of the plaza and the ability to provide, I'll ask a question and I'll make my comments after. I'm not suggesting we have an obligation to provide space for yoga classes, etc. That's not an obligation of council, but in terms of provision of shade, toilet, like what is a protected gathering space for community, what options are available after the demolition if it goes forth as proposed, and at what point would those options be available in the master plan, and what does that look like? Can we get some sort of description of what covered, shaded gathering places there are for community proposed in this area?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm just working through a couple of questions that I think I heard in there.
I'll make it simple.
If you could sharp,
if it's demolished tomorrow,
where do people go?
Where within Vincent do people go within this community that is reasonably walkable, cyclable, etc.? Like that was a comment made from the gallery about Forest Park or otherwise, which as the crow flies is close, but requires some travel through the underpass, etc. And what is, I suppose in words, what does the master plan provide for community gathering space that provides some protection from the elements and amenity that is in reality or perception is currently provided by the pavilion that is going to be available to community in the plaza space?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the clarification. Look, I think I understand the comments from the gallery and through you, Mayor Cole. The question that we were asked was if that facility wasn't there, are there alternative spaces? So what we've done is looked at available spaces within the city's suite of facilities and identified that there are some halls that would be available for the uses that were expected. But I understand what the community is saying in terms of you do still need to get into a car. Yeah.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
it's not
I
an
understand.
interactive session. We really appreciate you being here. Excuse me, please. We have public question time for the purpose for you to speak. This is not an opportunity for further statements while we deliberate. So I do ask you to please be respectful of the process and thank you for understanding.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. I do understand the frustration. So the response that I was just going to make is that we do have halls that are scattered across the city of Vincent. And I agree, they're not in that particular part of Vincent, but there are available spaces, and that we have responded to that in the briefing notes to indicate that at particular times and days there are alternatives that are available. But I agree, people would need to probably get into a car to get there. So that may be, part of the difficulty there. In terms of the question about master planning, I might refer to my colleague to my left.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the master plan currently suggests some opportunities that the plaza could provide. These do include a storage facility, a toilet facility, a pop-up or temporary container cafe, a raised decking structure, furniture, barbecue areas, and a electric wheelchair charging point. But it also mentions that the detailed design consideration is required to determine the exact extent of this amenity. We would be planning after receiving the Section 18 approval to do works in this area, we will be doing further community consultation to understand what types of activities and amenities the community would like to see in the plaza construction before going through the detailed design process. So that would also dictate whether the things listed in the master plan are still the right amenities for this, or whether we need to amend that based on that community consultation.
Can I also just at this point highlight clause 3 of the resolution that talks about the community meeting space being considered as part of the detailed design of the proposed Banks Reserve Plaza.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So just going back to the numbers in relation to, so I understand the long-term vision. I understand the challenge in delivering it as well, because it currently doesn't sit, we can't point to a budget and say this is exactly when this will be delivered. I guess looking at I think long term, I think it's difficult to, given some of the considerations. I agree with community that you would not, if this was demolished, it wouldn't be replaced as is, but I don't think you would ever design a building in that location like this again either. I think that the challenges that the physical building presents, its outlook, I think that the amenity that it's offering is able to be replaced in the medium term through the master planning process, the amenity that is highly valued, but that I guess for me, I'm a little bit stuck on the question of deferral, which was ultimately what the petition has asked us to do, because if you look at the costings that have been presented, I don't think that we're going to see anything different down the track. I just don't know whether we have the certainty of what will replace or what will be provided and budgeted to be provided. And if you look at those numbers of that 210,000, the offer of weeding may well extend to an offer of removing graffiti, which means you might be able to remove a portion of the $25,000 a year that is presented as a cost, which is 100 out of the 210,000, and the $90,000 is demolition, which occurs before, during, or after anyway. So that $210,000 may well be something if you take a 4-year period, may well be something in the low tens of thousands, which is a much more palatable number than the way that it's been presented. But I will listen to the debate and consider potentially a further option. But I think there is no urgency to demolish it, but I do support that long term there is a better way to provide community space that is usable. But I think that there's currently the reason for the angst, and it is understood, is that disconnect exists between something going and not knowing exactly what will replace it, and numbers being thrown around like more than $2 million for a council that has an asset management struggle ahead of it with assets that are, quite the earlier term, unable to be rationalised. I think is a significant challenge. So I'll listen to the debate.
Perhaps I could jump in here, because I do think that the point that's perhaps really capturing people's attention is that the Banks Reserve Master Plan talks about a community building of some $2.5 million, which is quite a fancy community building up high on the hill. And I think that when council considered the master plan, we talked about the fact that that was a high spend building, and that wasn't included in the first round of costings within the master plan because of that point. But in terms of the options that have been presented back to the community and the costings, the critical change for me is that in detailed design of the plaza, we do now want to look at a indoor-outdoor meeting space incorporated into the plaza and see that as a better use of space than perhaps taking up that space with a kayak storage shed. Kayak storage doesn't mean that that's off the table, but in terms of that location within the plaza, the change here that will need to come through further detailed consideration, detailed design, which was always part of the Banks Reserve Master Plan, is that indoor-outdoor space needs to be included sooner rather than later. It needs to be cost effective and needs to be included within the plaza. So from my perspective, I think it's really important that we don't look at, in terms of the demolition of the pavilion, there might be no rush, but unless it's actually going to sit there and continue to look weedy and fenced, it needs money spent on it. So whilst there might not be any rush to demolish it, it's not that we have the option of just simply opening up tomorrow, because it needs money spent on it. So that's a consideration for me also. And in terms of the actual Banks Reserve Master Plan, I do believe that there was genuine consultation on this process, and that the rereading the Banks Reserve Master Plan, going back through the points that were discussed at the workshops, talking to council members that attended those workshops, the demolition of the pavilion was an integral part of the Banks Reserve Master Plan because of the fact that the plaza needed to take that space. It's mentioned in the Banks Reserve Master Plan at the time that this matter came to council in December 2018. Council deferred decision because there were concerns about the demolition of the pavilion at that time. I specifically remember when Mick Quirk was the director seeking that he provide additional information in the report when it came back to council in March 2019. And effectively that was the point at which council endorsed the master plan, with the demolition of the pavilion being intrinsic to that. There was comments in consultation about the demolition. I've personally spoken to people about this at the park at various stages over the last couple of years. So I don't believe there were flaws in the consultation every step of the way in terms of even the demolition. I have to be frank that administration were keen to move ahead. It was me that asked for the community meeting to happen because I knew there were residual concerns in the community about demolition, and that it is often when you're implementing the decision, not at the time that you're making the decision, but when very visual things are happening, where fences are going up, signage is going up. I know from experience now, 8 years in local government, that is the time that people often connect with what's happening and have the desire to talk it through again. And that's why we held the community meeting, to go through how we had reached this decision, the process involved in the master plan, and to hear people's views. We genuinely considered whether we needed to pause. We did pause while we reflected on the costs of either having the pavilion as is for a short to medium period of time. We talked about whether we would demolish the wings and leave the north facing side of the building. We talked then about the fact that what we were hearing from the community is that they really want a community meeting space and they want an indoor area as part of that. So that's when the three options were presented back to community, talking about the costs of full retention, the costs of partial retention, and the idea of bringing that community meeting space in a much more low scale way as to the $2.5 million building proposed, but in something that would actually create a really lovely focus for meeting at the plaza. Great for parties, great for community gatherings. We'd like it to be large enough to host a yoga class and to have it in that plaza setting. So I do believe that this is not just a decision for council around demolition of the pavilion. It's actually about whether we back the Banks Reserve master plan vision. And for me, seeing the response to the community to the Banks Reserve playground and active zone has been really phenomenal. Even talking to residents who don't want us to demolish the pavilion, they have spoken very favourably about the way in which the city has designed and rolled out that development. I've spoken to people about the aesthetic, which is a really important part of the Banks Reserve master plan, those design guidelines, the colour palette, the materials. And I've observed the number of families, groups of friends coming down there, how popular it is, how people are struggling to find space at the tables and barbecue area between the playground and the active zone, because it is breathing new, fresh air into what was really a dilapidated playground. Really well loved and served its purpose, but this has really been a boon for the community in terms of the playground. So in terms of just discarding old, we're currently looking at heritage projects for Beatty Park Reserve. We're currently talking about character retention. We're not here to simply discard old, but we need to look at making the most of every location. And for me, it is really about the plaza and what that will bring to Banks Reserve. I think it is important that when our long-term financial plan comes forward next month, we need to have the costings in there for Banks Reserve to move forward. And for me, the integral parts of that are the plaza and the Walter Brook Bridge to connect that through from the playground to the plaza, to take the overflow of the people picnicking, to make that connection back to good toilet facilities, because we know the modular toilet is just a temporary situation. So for me, rather than keeping the old hall going, I really back the master plan vision with the meeting space included. I think that is a pivotal thing for me. And I don't want to put money into a pavilion that's not going to last the distance. I would rather that we put every penny towards making that plaza come online as soon as possible, and that we prioritise that in the long-term financial plan. I have been having conversations with Leon Pericles, the lead petitioner, over since the end of February, over different options for the pavilion. Leon spoke to me at first about a women's shed. Fantastic idea to have a women's shed in Vincent. We have our men's shed. They do take women members. I have been a member in the past, but the idea of a women's shed is a great thing. But I just don't think that this is the location for a women's shed. Leon is also talking about a bird breeding program, and I see no reason why that couldn't be incorporated into the plaza design. I understand it needs a wall for breeding boxes, and that idea can still very much be pursued. I just would like to say that I hold Leon Pericles in the highest regard. Not only is he an extremely well-regarded artist and designer, he is also an incredibly kind and wonderful human being. And I have spoken to him on many occasions over the last months about this, and he has always been incredibly respectful. He is a visionary. He brings a lot of people along with him and has a lot of fantastic networks. And I understand that and I respect that so much. But on this, I just think that the plaza design is really going to be the thing that is going to open up that view to the river, create more space for people to meet in both an outside and indoor way, in which is really what we're seeing across our community, what people are looking for. We will work with anyone who's interested in finding alternative venues if they do want that traditional hall situation. And it is my objective to really move forward with funding the plaza as soon as possible and seeing that in the long-term financial plan next year. So I do support the officer recommendation, and I would like to move forward so as not to create any further angst or money being spent on a hall that I don't think is in the right location or the future of Banks Reserve, and to put that into the plaza and move forward with that. Councillors, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Yes, look, this has been a very difficult process, and it's something that we've been dealing with for a number of years. I was part of that original working group back in 2018 when we had those discussions, and we did conduct that consultation over some time, including council sending it back for further consultation, just to make sure we were capturing those views of the community. I do want to reassure the community that you have been heard. There has been a lot of listening over that time. That doesn't always result in the desired outcome from the community's point of view, but it doesn't mean that hasn't been taken into consideration. As the Mayor said, I've sat in those working group meetings, and the demolition was definitely discussed, as it was intrinsic to the master plan. The discussion about the building of a plaza, the building of a possible new pavilion, and the reconfiguration of the car park was all part of a discussion about the removal of that hall. I think given that we did go through that process and sent it back for further consultation, I now feel, and did feel when we approved the master plan, that I was satisfied with our level of consultation, that we had done what we needed to do to ensure that we had considered the views of the community and made sure that we had taken into account both that and a lot of other factors. I think what's important is that the community views are a necessary part of this consultation, but they're not the only factor that goes into making these decisions. And as we've seen in this situation, there's significant cost implications to retaining this hall. There's some real barriers to this hall being used or being enhancing the Banks Reserve precinct and being used to its full potential. So while it might not be the desired outcome from the community, I think it is the best outcome for the park and for the reserve and for the broader Vincent community. I think that what I've reflected on is that in making these decisions, we have a responsibility not only to the immediate local community to ensure that we're providing facilities for them, that we understand their needs, but we also have a responsibility to the entire Vincent community. And that means good financial governance and making sometimes very difficult decisions, because it has to be read in the context of everything else that is happening in that reserve, in the community, and across the whole of Vincent. And I think that I can't put my hand in the air to say extra expenditure should be spent on this hall to retain it in its current state when there is other better options available for the community and for our finances. So I absolutely agree that we need to review that detailed design, and that indoor-outdoor space should be considered as part of the plaza design on a much lower scale than the original $2.4 million pavilion. And I think that if we can work to have that in place or the designs begun and costed and then funded sooner rather than later, that is going to provide a better outcome for the Banks Reserve and for the community. I'm very open to considering other ideas that have been proposed, such as Mr. Pericles's bird breeding and any other new ideas that might be proposed for the reserve, but I think that's something that we can consider when we're looking at that detailed design and really come up with something that is going to resolve some of the issues that have been raised, but have a much more beautiful and more functional space in that area. So I support the officer recommendation,
And I look forward to moving to the next phase where we can see what can replace it.
Thank you, Councillor Castle. Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I just want to reiterate a couple of points that fellow councillors have already raised. I went, coming through this issue, went back comprehensively over all of the meetings that have been held in the consultation, just to really satisfy myself that really every discussion that needed to be had been held. And I arrived at the point that wholly satisfied with the master plan and where we arrived with that, and did spend some time going down to Banks Reserve. And really, I think I agree with Councillor Wallace, and similar to Mayor Cole, I've also received a huge amount of compliments from people in supporting the new playground and nature reserve. And I think that does give a lot of confidence to really the next stages with the master plan, and the way that it is sympathetic and complementary to all the great environmental work that's being done to date down there. And that includes some really fantastic work being done by the local community, of which all of us in this room remain really thankful. And you can see the effort, the work of their efforts, particularly on the waterways and all the local nature, the nature plantings. There have also, it's not only the loss of a site, and I think for me, the third point in the recommendation is the provision of a community meeting space. And that, what I've heard from the community is really central, is a place where they want for the community to meet, to congregate together, and the park not only in its essence provides that, but I think that community meeting space will provide an ideal location for people to do that. I also heard many concerns at varying meetings from people worried about the potential intensification of the site and impact on parking. So I think we do also, as we sort of move to next stage and revisit some of those great ideas that have come forward, we do need to be mindful that that was probably one of the strongest concerns that I heard from the community, about worrying about people coming in from outside the community using that space, parking, and that intrusion into those areas through that intensification. So I think that's probably a point that I will carry forward to be mindful of. The cost from the restoration work, I think all of us are always astounded when we actually see these costs come through, but we've been through that, like with the Mount Hawthorn Hall and the Lesser Hall and North Perth Hall, bringing our older buildings up to code, ensuring that they're accessible and meeting all of the standards. They are big ticket items. So when we sort of hear these big figures sort of quoted, $500,000, I think, is when we look at the work that's been done into North Perth Hall over the years and Mount Hawthorn, I wasn't really shocked to see those sort of figures. But I would say that there are opportunities on the next stage to revisit some of those ideas that have come forward. I think that's the ideal opportunity for us to really look at what are the appropriate additional sort of uses on that site and maybe other sites in Vincent as well. The bird breeding is one of those. I didn't have time to revisit the City of Cambridge's program at Lake Munga and see what the status. I know that a few years ago that had led to the education centre. I think there was talk about it being closed, but unfortunately, I hadn't been paying that much attention. So I think that's one of those projects that we may look to our neighbouring councils and what they're doing in that area. But I will be supporting the officer's recommendation. I did want to raise one question through you, Mayor, to the director regarding the salvaging of the materials, particularly the timber floors, and whether there's an opportunity for us to repurpose that within our own city rather than to salvage those off. So just one question through to the director.
Yes, that's the question we'd have to ask. I mean, we've already, the demolition was already planned and deferred a couple of times. So we've got quotes or estimates, and the quotes will be based on the contractor taking the material away and recycling what they can. So we'd have to go back and re-quote on the basis that the wood would be delivered to our depot for potential use. But that's a question we can ask.
So on that point, I'd like to propose an additional sort of clause on that is requesting that we revisit that demolition, the costing of the demolition tender. But before I do, I just want to actually ask what the implications are on the timing of the works really what the implications would be for that for timing of the demolition.
Yes, Nicole. So we've not booked the demolition. We've been waiting for tonight's meeting to find out the outcome. So there's no date planned at the moment, so it won't impact. We'll just have to go back to the contractor and get some updated costs. The reason why I say that is the wood could potentially be valuable, and the contractor could have factored that into the cost that, the contractor can sell the wood or use it somewhere else. So that's the reason for getting updated costs. But yeah, it won't impact on the project.
I guess the question is that something that you're prepared to do, or do you require an amendment?
Through you, Nicole, we'll do that without an amendment. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Okay, the next item that was raised by members of the public gallery this evening is item 9.3, response to petition relating to odour from 7 Grams Chicken, number 212 to 214 Lake Street, Perth. Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. A couple of questions. The first one just relates to the development, so not directly to the odour, but to the development approval, or the requirement for it is referred to in the report, and it notes that the applicant was never told that they required development approval. So it should be noted the city did not advise the business of the requirement prior to them installing the ventilation system. But unless I'm wrong, that's the last mentioning of it. So has a development application been received, and is the ventilation system that is currently installed, has it been approved in its current format?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the answer is the applicant hasn't been required to lodge a planning approval for it at this point, because the odour assessments that will and are and will continue to be taken will obviously, will lead to potentially a change to that system. And so to require the owner to gain a planning approval for the current structure when it may well change into a different structure, we consider to be premature. So that requirement will be imposed on the operator once we've provided them with requirements to address the odour concern. So it'll all be packaged into one, and they'll need to gain planning approval, building approval, and address the odour issue all at once.
Okay, so potentially the odour consultant has to consider the potential relocation or redesign of the flue as it currently is, because let's say for argument's sake the odour resolution is achieved, but through the planning process there's a requirement to alter either the location, size or orientation or number of flues, which may then lead to other odour issues, which may then put the neighbourhood back to square one potentially in terms of the odour issue. I understand the need for both to be separate, but can it be fairly assumed that the assessment of the odour is not just based on the current design, current location of the flue, but that the suite of packages made available to the applicant or to the business would include all of those things?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct. That's exactly the process we're proposing to follow. So the existing structure may not be the solution, and so the odour consultant is absolutely not limiting themselves to what's currently there. It's about what is required to address the odour concern. Whatever that might look like is what the operator would be required to do.
So what's proposed as the course of action in response to the petition, which appears on page, whatever it is, 126 is it? Thank you. So there's 5 things there. Appoint a consultant, meet the residents, assess the odour, provision of expert advice, there's nothing that's listed in there that's actually required of the business operator. I guess I'll ask some questions also about the usage and the definition shortly, but I guess as a course of action, is the presumption that because the fluid system meets the standards, that there is nothing that the owner can either be requested or required to do unless there is evidence on the basis of that proposed course of action to be able to provide scientific evidence to support the odour being an issue? If not, why is there not something proposed in the course of action to actually request or require the owners to potentially change their I don't know what other solutions are there, off-site preparation, other processes, other investment, but it seems as though the issue has been presented potentially, or issues being presented as real and observed as real by the neighbourhood, by evidence on the ground physically, residue on clothing, on footpaths, etc. But the course of action being proposed in response to a petition which has come out of frustration, effectively nothing happening in 6 months, is to go back to the residents and deal with it in that way and with the consultant. But there's nothing proposed in terms of the business itself. Is that, can I get an understanding of why the business isn't involved in the process at this point?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, the business is involved. First of all, we're going to gather the information and the evidence around what the issue is, independent of working with the business, because we don't want those investigations to be affected by the business changing their operation midway through gathering that evidence. So point 5 is where the business is involved. That's where we'll be requiring them to implement solutions, and they could be changing their operation. It could be shutting down, moving somewhere else. It could be implementing better exhaust systems or updating the one they have, etc. And I would just also comment that when we received this complaint, we investigated. The applicant didn't have valid building approval, hadn't complied with the Australian standards around ventilation. We required them to do that. They then installed the ventilation system. We had certainly hoped that would address the issue because they had complied with the Australian standards, and that's where we had assumed that would address the issue. We didn't receive any complaints after that ventilation system was installed until just a few days before the petition came in. So I understand the frustration. I've been out there. I agree there is an issue and it needs to be resolved as quickly as possible. But we've done everything we can to try and resolve this issue. It's not an easy thing to resolve. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the usage, how is fast food defined in our scheme, please?
Yes, so to keep it simple, fast food is a premises that's producing food that's ready to eat primarily off premises. Restaurant cafe is producing that same food ready for consumption primarily on premises.
So that's a definition in our scheme or in the model text, or is that is a planning definition because the wonderful world of Google provides different definitions to fast food, but is that is considered under West Australian planning considerations to be the definition of a fast food premises?
Yes, through Mayor Cole, that is the definition in the city's planning scheme, and it is based on the model scheme text the state government requires local governments to comply with.
Sorry, can you run that past me again, the exact wording?
So it's the preparation of food ready for consumption. Fast food is primarily off premises and restaurant cafe is primarily on premises.
I'm just struggling. Do you mind if I just clarify this? Because do you mean that the preparation of food off premises?
For consumption, sorry. For consumption.
Oh, for consumption.
Yes,
I thought you meant
my
they were
fault.
preparing the food off premises.
I've oversimplified myself.
Then how does that work when McDonald's has a dining area?
So it comes down to whether they're producing food primarily for consumption on premises or off premises. The definition for McDonald's is considered, and Hungry Jack's, it's considered that the majority of the food is taken away.
Sorry, you go.
Sorry, no, it's your questioning time. I'm sorry. I'm just
sorry. By that, so if that's the definition that we're relying upon, is there an avenue to potentially require the presentation of statistics from the business. And I accept and really appreciate, by the way, that the questions that were asked by the neighbours, that I think they mentioned that the business is potentially a victim as well. This is not they have moved their premises from where they were to where they are in good faith to grow their operation, and they've been a successful addition. And in the world of fried chicken, they make delicious fried chicken. No one's questioning that. But I guess that by that definition, if 70% of their business was takeaway and some form of food delivery service, would that then mean the city would reclassify it as fast food and potentially seek a change to their planning approval because it's not cafe restaurant?
Through Mayor Cole, potentially. The city has investigated this matter already. And all I'd like to say, this is an ongoing compliance matter. So all I'll say at this point is that we're continuing to investigate that issue. It is not an easy thing to establish, but those investigations are ongoing, and I'd like to leave that open.
I get there's on paper looking at, there's months of process ahead, evidently. So from I guess, and the answer may well be none, but I guess the question that is asked by community and through the process as well is, if you're in, and the things that are easily changeable but frustrating, like going inside, but things like hanging out your washing and having it covered in fried chicken grease, what is available to people to people who are in that circumstance whilst this process is going on, given that it's heading rapidly towards 12 months and we're probably looking 18 to 24 before there's a resolution, which may or may not be a resolution that requires changes depending on what evidence comes back. If you're in that circumstance, is there any avenue open to? I'm not sure there's a quiet room in the preparation room with 3,000 flues and an unbelievable extraction system fix it. I'm unsure technically as to where this is going to end up, but what is open to community in terms of dealing with the very real impact that's clearly happening in their daily amenity?
Well, I guess what I could say through you, Mayor Cole, is that the operator has made the changes that they've been required to this point. They are aware that the issue is ongoing. And I think that the priority is and needs to continue to be having them change their operation, implement solutions and changes as quickly as possible to resolve the issue. The question around, I'll just point out the question around the planning, land use, whether it's fast food or restaurant, is not necessarily going to resolve the issue. Even if we say that the use is fast food and it's not permitted, they change their operation to reduce the amount of takeaway, the volume of and the odour and the volume of grease going into the surrounding air won't change. So and the issue will remain. So we're focused on resolving that issue and having them change their operation to remove the amount of particulate that they're releasing into the suburb. So that's our priority, and we need to do that as quickly as we can. I understand that some of these steps have already taken place. We've engaged the consultant. We've met with the residents. The consultant's has already taken a number of measurements, and that continues.
Can I propose an amendment, please? That we just have, so what's there becomes number 1, and 2 is that a further report to council no later than October 2021.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Wallace.
Yep. I just think it's fair to community and to us to make sure that it's something that's, as the process goes on, I understand the complexities and the challenges, but I think as representatives of community, it's fair to ask that we report back to council so that we can see what progress is being made and where there are potentially interventions. So that would be ask for your support on the amendment.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I just agree that I think the one thing this item was lacking was a schedule about when these proposed course of actions will be implemented. Like I largely agree with the approach that's been put forward by administration. So yeah, imposing a date to report back to council is a good idea, in my opinion.
Any further comments? Councillor Hallett.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up about the use issue. Beyond the model text that the state government gives us
Is this relevant to the amendment?
No.
Okay. We're just dealing with the amendment and then I'll come back to you, although Councillor Loden's itching to say or ask a question or say a comment. Okay, no further comments on the amendment. I'll put it. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Before I go to you, Councillor Loden, I just have to know, did this actually go through the planning process or was this simply an exempt change of use?
Yes, this was an exempt change of, what was an existing use approved.
Yeah, an existing
Yes.
use. So,
Yep. So it wasn't
the
exempt,
city
it was
didn't
an existing
assess it as a planning application. They moved in and then you found that they didn't have a correct building licence. And then, so it was never assessed. Is this fast food or is this a cafe restaurant? Because it was an exempt, there was no change of use. They simply took up a lease and moved in. Right.
That's correct.
Okay. I think that really helps. Okay. Councillor Loden.
Thank you, Mayor. We have talked a little bit about the timeframe, but do you have an indicative timeframe to get to the completion of this process? And I know sometimes it's how long's a piece of string, but
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, I can't give you a definite timeframe, but I would hope that in the next few weeks we'll be able to require the operator to make changes.
And then my only other query was just in terms of your 5-step process. I was wondering if there's an opportunity for a 6th step, which is to go back to, it's already coming back to council, obviously, but a step to actually tell the petitioners and the people that are affected that this is what has been done, so that because there is this risk of, okay, has something been done or not? I'm still experiencing odour issues and grease and so forth. But so once they know that something's been implemented, assuming something is implemented, then at least they're aware of there should be a change in the air or not.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that's a very good point. I think that has certainly been assumed that will occur, but it didn't occur last time. And so I think it's a very good point to raise, and it must happen this time. So noted.
Does it require an amendment?
No, it wouldn't require an amendment. We will ensure that occurs.
It's on the record. Councillor Hallett.
Most has been said. Maybe just in terms of the use and the fast food stuff, in terms of thinking through future situations where this might arise, can we maybe have a discussion at a workshop around the use classifications and whether there's scope to have additional definitions? And maybe that's not possible, but
Yes, through Mayor Cole, we can certainly have a conversation about the land uses and what options there are around these types of land uses and similar issues.
Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a couple of comments in the gallery regarding banking up of traffic in neighbouring streets. So I know we're deliberating on the petition and the odour issue, but I do want to actually get some comments through you, Mayor, from the director on those issues and addressing those issues for the local residents.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, I'm not aware of those issues, so I'll have to take that on notice, investigate that to understand what the issues are, what complaints we've received and what's occurring out there on site, and provide some separate advice to council on that.
I'll make sure that I'm on the email to you regarding that. It won't require an amendment.
Perhaps you could talk to your colleague next to you and seek some ranger observations. Just on this issue of use, given that the city didn't undergo a planning assessment and this has simply been a new business taking up a lease, I really would like to know that this is also going to be, I know you've said it's being investigated, but I think that in the report back to council, the use is something that's of very much of interest to me, particularly as it hasn't been through an assessment process. And I have driven past and just the appearance, it doesn't really look like a cafe restaurant. It does have to be very careful when this is a compliance matter. So the look and feel and presentation, and it really does beg the question, is this appropriate in this location? So I think that really comes down to the use, and I would just request that that be dealt with in the report back to council. given that the city had not had an opportunity to assess that, given it didn't go through a planning process. Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, all those in favour of the motion as amended? That's passed unanimously. Thank you for coming in. We'll be in touch. Okay, the next item raised is 10.4, which is the response to petition Verge parking along Vincent Street. Can I please have a mover and seconder to this item? Moved Councillor Loden, seconded Councillor Wallace. Sorry, Hallett, you were just reaching for your name plaque.
Thank you, Mayor. Just the queries raised from the gallery. One was around why going through this process around a petition. It was raised with administration. What could they have done differently? And the second one, just around why this is not prohibited already under our scheme for cars blocking spaces that are identified as a high risk when you're pulling out your driveway.
Yes, through my calls, difficult question to answer. I mean, it's taken quite a long time to resolve this. So I suppose the first thing to say is the petition doesn't change the outcome. You know, administration will investigate, make a decision based on the facts. So the petition obviously creates additional work, you know, the council report, etc., but it wouldn't have changed the outcome. The team is a small team, the engineering team, they're extremely busy. Rangers were involved and they tried to resolve the matter informally. There's a particular resident who parks on the Verge, and that's, I think, the cause of a lot of the issues. So we were trying to resolve it informally, and that, you know, has been unsuccessful. That's alluded to in the report. So, and we wanted to give the matter proper consideration because we were wary of setting a precedent. There's lots of Verge parking around Vincent. Residents tend not to want us to remove it. I mean, if we applied standards and you know, strictly, then we would remove some of that Verge parking. And also, if we applied standards, we'd be moving poles, chopping down trees, etc. So we're trying to apply a common sense approach. So that's some of the insight in the process we've gone through to get to this result. We don't. I suppose the second question is, you know, why don't we inspect all of Vincent and find these safety issues? I mean, that's a resource issue. We can never do that. We respond to complaints and reports we get from the officers on the ground and deal with them as best we can. But we don't carry out, you know, continuous inspections looking for line of sight issues.
Just to follow up on the first point there. So I think if I understand correctly, this was raised and that was basically an action sitting with the administration. I guess the frustration from the community member was that they weren't seeing any signs of progress. So is there something around how we're communicating progress of these activities or timeframes or something like that? It's an opportunity for us to, I guess, prevent needing a petition or something like that?
Yeah, through my call. I think you're right. I mean, I'm the director responsible for the two areas have been looking into this, and it's taken longer than we would have liked. We accept that. And obviously the residents felt frustrated and have to raise a petition. So there's definitely things we could do better. I've not got all the information in front of me about when it started and how long it take, but I accept that it could have been done better. So there's definitely learning for administration in terms of communicating clearly with the residents about how long it might take and what our options are.
I'm supportive of the office recommendation. I think there probably is an opportunity here that we can do this better, how we manage expectations of our community. And if you're able to, when these issues are raised, give people an appropriate time frame, and also then if that time frame blows out because of reasons, then re-communicate. People understand and respect that there's an increased workload and there's things that we need to do. And I think that might help alleviate, because the classic thing we see is people raise something and they go, oh, they never got back to us. And it's in the works. There's resources being allocated, and it's that maybe just that small step of saying, yes, we're working on this and we're planning on getting back to you, and this is when it's going to come back, or something like that, to ease that tension or that frustration. Thank you.
Who is next? No one? No, I will speak. Look, I understand this has taken longer than the petitioner would have liked, and the director has said, you know, could have been communicated a little better. But I do just want to put this in context. Like, we don't, no, removing verge parking is not something that's commonplace. It's not that there is a set process for removing verge parking. It's quite unusual because of the fact that residents rely on it, and we know that these things are fiercely, residents can be fiercely protective of their verge parking. So I think that is a bit of a context, that if you're making a change to something which is sort of universal across the city, where people predominantly do have use of their verges for parking and they have priority use, and if someone parks on their verge, they can call the ranger and they can get an infringement. So I understand that this was a slightly unique request. And obviously, when looking at the particular circumstances of Vincent Street, it certainly makes sense that it's warranted in this regard. But I also appreciate that the city took the opportunity to discuss that with the resident that is primarily causing the obstruction, to try to resolve it amicably. I think that's a good approach. I think that we should approach people on a personal level and see if we can find solutions without having to go down the path of signage in the first instance. So I think that was a good move, and that does then add to the time frame. So you have to consider if it's happening on Vincent Street, where do we then next need to consider? I do have a question in relation to the unattached trailer, and once the signage goes in, no parking on the verge, will this cover both vehicles and unattached trailers?
Chair McCall, yes, it does.
That's good. All right, thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare that carried. The next item raised by a member of public who is still very patiently waiting was 9.1, number 14 Franklin Street, Leederville, proposed 3 grouped dwellings. Can I have a mover, Councillor Wallace, and seconder, Councillor Hallett?
Thanks, Nicole. So I think the WA Planning Commission set the applicant and the city somewhat of a challenge here after approving a 3-lot subdivision below the average site area requirements of the residential design codes for the neighbourhood. And I think that was reflected in the initial level of opposition to the development. But I would like to applaud the proponent for working with the city's officers and design review panel and the site's neighbours to an extent to make a number of improvements to the design that I think are substantially better outcomes for the neighbours, the streetscape, and hopefully the future occupants. Thanks to Mr. Belcher and Mr. DeLanzo, neighbours to the east, who emailed through yesterday in support of the changes that have occurred in the last week, and the subsequent support of their entire development after previously speaking in opposition during the briefing last week. I do hear the comments from Mr. Cianci tonight regarding the size and scale of these proposed structures, and they certainly do cover a lot of the lot. I agree that this is a problem with the current design codes that this development was assessed against, but as noted, we do have to assess and decide this application on the basis of those codes. I'd note that the revisions to the state residential design code that are currently being considered have shrinking building footprints while maintaining density as a goal. Regarding the impacts to the western lots, there's a 1.5 metre setback from the western boundary to the upper floor balcony for the master bedroom at the front of the dwelling, which is below the deemed to comply standard of 2.4 or 2.6, both of which were quoted in the assessment. It's a fairly large deviation, but I do agree with the officer's assessment that there is acceptable in this instance, noting that there's no visual privacy impacts, no impacts to the western lot's winter sign access, and combined with the 2.4 metre setback on the adjoining property, there is sufficient space to maintain ventilation. The other deviations from the deemed to comply standards, I think, are minor and their treatment's acceptable. And for that reason, I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation to approve. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, can I just ask a question about the additional condition that was put in around the verge trees and what impact that would have on the adjacent property? Like, where would the location of those verge trees be put and impact on future crossovers?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the amendment or the request around additional street trees that was actually recommended by administration post council briefing and ties into the acceptability of the design itself. Those 2 street trees there's opportunity on the eastern side of the proposed crossover to Lot 2. And then there's also an opportunity on the western side of the proposed crossover to Lot 1. So you heard from resident tonight around concerns that that may impact the future development potential of their site. This was contemplated as part of this, and I'll just talk through some of these numbers. Basically, street trees need to have a clearance, minimum clearance. The standard is 1 metre to crossovers, just to ensure that its health is maintained. The proposed crossover for the subject site at Lot 1 is some 1.5 metres from that western lot boundary. Okay, so there's adequate clearance there to provide a street tree. The existing crossover to Mr. Chianchi's property to the west, it's located 3.5 metres from that side boundary currently. So there's adequate clearance there on today's development. Future development potential, if that site is redeveloped, a crossover, if proposed to that side boundary, would need to be at least 0.5 metres from that lot boundary itself. So if you do some numbers, basically with a 1.5 metre setback currently on the subject site, as well as the minimum of 0.5 metre clearance for Mr. Chianchi's property, it would allow a street tree to be accommodated without it undermining the development potential of the adjoining property.
Thank you. Mayor Cole, through you to the Manager of Development Services. I'm sure you've missed me. So, and taking on board some of the comments that were made, but if you look at and leave the WAPC decision aside, because that's not our decision, so leaving the fact that there are 3 proposed lots. If you look at the issues of, so we're talking about 3 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom homes, and they're not, and they are full, 3 full bathrooms as well. Walk-in robes into some of the, so significant size rooms, large-scale kitchens, scullery, etc. If you take, and obviously applicants are free to apply for whatever they choose, but would it be fair to say that if they were either 3x2s or 3x3, so if there was a deletion of a bedroom from each of the dwellings, all of the issues of the size of stores, the open space, the side setbacks, provision of landscaping would likely be able to be resolved through design, and not that, but the I guess the question that was asked from the gallery was about potential overdevelopment of the site, given the size of the rooms and the number of rooms that are being provided. And some of them are minor in nature, some not, but is the nature of the departures from the deemed to comply all lend towards bulk and scale or potentially overdevelopment of the site? Is that a fair, I know that the officer recommendation is to approve it, but is that a fair assessment of the issues that have caused the departures from the deemed to comply, that there's more building on site than, well, there's a lot of building on site. There you go. That's probably a better question.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I wouldn't necessarily agree. Ultimately, the contention is that there's a lot of building on site and you've pulled out certain departures. That also needs to be balanced with the parameters of the R-codes, which also allows, for example, a greater amount of building to the boundary. You're allowed to build up to 2/3 the length of a side boundary. So, for example, that is limited. So if you refer to the lot boundary setback departure to that western lot boundary, you have to view the entirety of that facade on balance. Another design element is around ensuring that there's enough private open space, outdoor living areas for each of the future occupants. And there's in the order of, I think, 37 square metres for units 1 and 2. So that is far in excess of the minimum standard of 24 square metres under the R code. So it depends on which elements you refer to. I understand your logic and your line of discussion, but ultimately we have a development proposal before us. We need to consider it on its own merits. And though they might have 4 bedrooms, as you've rightfully pointed out, it's how that has translated to building bulk and whether that has been appropriately mitigated. And in administration's view, in working with the design review panel and such, and the changes that have been made through the process, we believe that it is an appropriate outcome in this context.
Thank you. Question, I think, to the director. Oh, he's not there, so I can't ask him. So it's a tree question, so I'll ask you. So I'll make some comments about it afterwards, but I guess if you take what's proposed as the facade, there's no garage door, but effectively you've got 2 relatively small entrances. They're proposing 2 jacarandas. I know that's proposed to have an alternative species. My question was around the jacaranda or potentially the yellow, what are we looking at? Bloodwood, the yellow bloodwood, and their canopy size, given that the power lines are on this side of the road. So my question relates to who's responsible. I know it's whose responsibility, but whether, I guess you've got the existing street tree in the middle, 2 trees that are going to grow to 20 metres tall if they're allowed to grow to full maturity, and now 2 other trees on the side. So pretty much the front vista is, so all of the significant landscaping is effectively either being proposed to be compensated in the verge, which is not on the lot, or at the very front extreme end of the lot, because there's only a small tree proposed in each of the outdoor spaces. From a planning perspective, is it part comment, part question, so you might not have to respond, but I guess the placement of the landscaping that's been either required by policy or requested or being suggested as a condition to compensate for the lack of meaningful on-site landscaping is actually increasing the dominance. So at the time when there's 2 vehicles parked at home, effectively when you look at the property, all you will see is an array of trees framing 4 cars parked across 80% of the lot width. I guess when we talk about, when the ARCODES talk to provision of windows, ventilation, etc., it gets quite specific about it being meaningful and actually providing amenity on the site and to the occupants of those rooms and otherwise. The landscaping and what's proposed is, regardless of the species, are they sufficient in terms of the intent of the built form policy, or is the built form policy sufficient enough in terms of its requirement for landscaping to actually provide meaningful on-site benefit of the landscaping, or are we just potentially ticking numbers boxes to try and get as much green stuff as we can that people can see? And what impact does that have on the streetscape? The director is back. He might be able to answer the question about the pruning, but I guess my concern is that we're focusing all of these trees at the very front, and the lots themselves will essentially be another wall-to-wall building of three proposed dwellings. So the director wasn't here at the beginning. So the question was whether, regardless of whether it's the jacaranda or the yellow bloodwood, given where they are proposed to be located, which is effectively adjacent to the footpath, and that the power lines are there, are those appropriate species to be planted under power lines? I know the obligation falls on the resident, but long term, is that an appropriate place to be putting trees that can grow to 20 metres tall?
Through McCall, I off the top of my head, I don't know the answer to that unless the managers had advice from parks about that particular species. But I suppose the broader answer is, they will have to be pruned under the power lines. So whatever height they will grow to, they will need to be, Western Power will require us to keep them below a certain height. So, that will be, if they're on the verge, that will be something that the city will have to deal with.
Okay, and if, just for clarity, if it's on the private land and it interferes with the power lines, what's that process? Do we require them to prune, or do we prune and charge the owners, occupiers for the pruning?
So McCall, that will be Western Power will require them to prune. If they don't, they'll do it and send them the bill.
Through you, Mayor Cole, so I'll follow on from that. And yes, our parks team did confirm that this particular species was selected because it deals well under power lines and responds well to pruning. In regards to the streetscape and from a planning perspective and your question around are we ticking boxes to satisfy a requirement, ultimately that is the deemed to comply standard. It is, there is a numerical figure associated with that, so there needs to be, can it be provided? I think in terms of its location, that is part of the consideration. Where they are proposed can be useful in terms of improving the streetscape and the amenity of the area. That has been the premise for the location of those two trees in the front property. I think it comes down to how you would even view that development, whether it's the approach coming from the east or the west, or whether you're directly in front of it. But yes, it will partially screen part of the development, but the intention isn't for, the test isn't to propose amount of canopy into the front courtyard area to screen the entire development altogether in some way to overcome a poor development outcome. So ultimately, I have to stress that we are satisfied with the built form outcome as it presents to the street, and that the addition of those plantings in the front setback area is really to just supplement that.
Are you ready to move on? Okay. Councillor Hallett.
Can I just propose an amendment? To already mentioned to swap the jacaranda trees with yellow bloodwoods, and I understand that the applicants confirmed that they don't object to that proposal.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Fotakis. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I've just got one question, just in regarding this one. What's the difference between administration does not oppose the amendment versus this is supported as it is on others?
Through you, Mayor Cole. Great question. The reason being, under the city's tree selection tool, and we also have a useful info sheet for our residents around choosing a tree. It includes both exotics and natives. So on that basis, the applicant rightfully selected an exotic. Administration's one, there's nothing wrong with that. In this instance though, understanding the premise for the amendment and the benefits of a native species, we don't oppose that either. But I guess either is available based on the city's choosing a tree information sheet.
Thank you. I'm supportive.
Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare that carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments or questions on the substantive? Councillor Fotakis.
I just want to say that the process on this, yes, we inherited subdivision from the WAPC and it was dealt with by our staff, but I also look to the issues that were raised at last week's briefing and the opportunity for members of the public, and in this instance, the neighbours, to raise their concerns and have them dealt with by the applicant in the interim week. And it just sort of clearly says to me, and we've had this process work time and time again, the process that we have with the briefing meetings and the council, being open to members of the public to come and voice their concerns, that this process really is working. So just want to say thanks for that and just acknowledge that while I can.
Thank you. Any further comments? Yes.
So just a question, just back to the proposed verge trees. Whilst the condition as written, is it presumed that the city will do the planting and the cost will be covered? Or just to confirm that the location will be to allow the minimum on the adjacent, or is it just, we're not going to turn up one day and find that we're 2 metres further into the adjacent verge than what was spoken about earlier? So is that the applicant's required to plant it, or they're required to fund the city to plant those verge trees?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in order to satisfy that condition, ultimately the location would need to be confirmed in consultation with administration. So that would confirm its actual location in the verge. It also needs to be to the city's specification in terms of planting in our verge area.
Thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just apologies if I've missed it. In the email that came through on Monday night from Urbanista, where they spoke about the carport structure and the boundary wall, I couldn't see that in the notes. Has that been updated? Was that accepted?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to confirm, yes, so there was an email sent to all elected members from the applicant. There were renders included as part of that, and they specifically showed, I suspect you're referring to, a portion of boundary wall that has been crossed out on that diagram. Just to confirm, those renders were prepared prior to last week's council briefing session, so they haven't had the opportunity to update that. That cross of that boundary wall had previously already been removed from the development plans that you were approving. That was just an illustration that is dated. So by virtue of showing that boundary wall, it was inaccurate and did not reflect what the site plan or the development plans that you're approving would be.
Anything further? I just want to say I do acknowledge that Nick has come in this evening and does still have some concerns about this development, but it was a very unusual situation to have two residents, neighbouring residents, turn out to the briefing on Tuesday night, feeling very upset about overlooking in privacy primarily, and feeling that was going to have a huge impact on the amenity of their homes, with some colourful descriptions of what they like to do in their, well, not both, I'll just say one particular resident gave colourful descriptions of what he likes to spend his time doing in his backyard, which is fine. But it is very unusual to then understand that the developer or applicant and the neighbours had a chat in the just out here along the corridor and managed to come to further agreement about what it would, take to actually get to a point where both of those neighbours emailed us and said we're really happy with the changes, and the applicant's basically making these changes, which means we're now happy to support these developments going ahead. So while not all neighbours are happy, it is really a pretty unusual situation to get emails like that during the week. And I do appreciate the applicant being open to, comments in the public gallery. That, the purpose really is to have that engagement and for people to come and talk and put their views forward. And hats off to the applicant for taking that on board and being a better neighbour. So I just wanted to mention that. Unless there's any further comments, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare, are you voting against? All those against? I declare that carried with Councillor Toppelberg voting against. Okay, so I just think at this point at 8:08 p.m, just we've dealt with 3 items. I don't think anyone could say we're a checkbox council, given that we've been here for 2 hours and 10 minutes, so we'll press on. Thank you for coming. The next item is 10.1, tender, supplier and laying of curbing. Councillor Loden, and seconded by Councillor Fotakis had a hand up first.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have some questions on the confidential attachment. It wouldn't be a tender without me having questions on the confidential attachment, of course. I was hoping it could be raised at the end of the meeting if possible. But I also had a couple of questions that are fine for the public gallery. I've had some conversations with the CEO and director via email this week, as I missed the meeting last week. And one of the discussions was around the inclusion of the criteria or assessment of the strategic community plan priorities as part of the tender. And just looking at the tender criteria, I don't see anything in there that relates to the SCP priorities. And so I was just wondering how that is incorporated into the tender process.
So, Emma Cole, That's a difficult question to answer, particularly with a tender for curbing. So that is a difficult question, but I can take
I
that
can
on
make it a
notice.
bit more specific, maybe if that helps. So the cement that we use going into this, cement is like 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. There's technologies that you can use to reduce the carbon footprint of the cement you use. So if we asked a question of our tenderers around what is the carbon footprint of the cement, that might be a way to demonstrate alignment with enhanced environment. Similarly, we could ask questions around if they utilise, if any of their employees are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, do they have a reconciliation action plan? Those sorts of things. And I recognise it's challenging because it's very specific to each of the activities that we do, and it probably requires conversations with broader parts of the organisation about what we should be inputting. But that's maybe potentially some of the ways that we could consider it in this process.
Yeah, through McCall. No, I recognise what Councillor Oda is saying, and that is an ongoing action, I think, that we are still working on. We haven't got that right yet. So some of those questions are not necessarily asked in relation to a curbing tender. You can imagine it's a very sort of traditional engineering type of service, and that's an area where we need to get a bit stronger on those issues. In terms of the cement question, understand what you're saying again. I mean, we did set the specification, so we said what we wanted, and in terms of the mix, if you like, that was something up front. So all tenderers came back with the same specification, what they'd use, so there's not a lot of difference between them. But I know, again, we could do more work on that, and that is a corporate thing I think that we need to get right.
Is a potential analogue to this when we've been looking at our tenders around our vehicle fleets and this potential to transition to a hybrid vehicles, to electric vehicles, to hydrogen powered vehicles, that we've included some aspects in those tenders or questions in those tenders. Recognise there's not a ready supply of low carbon cement or alternative products available today, but even almost just asking the question challenges these guys. Is that potentially an option?
Yeah, through my call, that's absolutely correct. And if you think how quickly things move, hybrid vehicles are a good example to use. A few years ago, we didn't have hardly any. Now that's our entire fleet. So the market is moving fast, and we are learning, as things change. So that's a valid question to ask. We do like to challenge the tenderers and see what they can provide. I mean, we've even got a hybrid truck now, which was something that you couldn't find 3 or 4 years ago. So
I'm just checking that this is okay to be raised under the confidential section at the end. Is that? Yep. So I'll reserve my other questions to that. Thank you.
Do you want me to defer this item to the end of the meeting? Is that going to have an impact on your voting on this matter? Oh, we'll have to if it's still live opening for questions. Are there any further, we'll have to deal with this at the end of the meeting. Are there any further comments or questions in the meantime? No? Okay, we will hold this item over and move it to the end of, has been moved and seconded, but we will hold it over until later in the meeting, come back to it. That takes us to item 10.2, e-permits implementation progress report, moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Other than moving it, I have nothing to say. I support the officer recommendation.
I thought you raised this for discussion.
No, I have to move the audit committee.
This is e-permits.
Oh, sorry, e-permits. Sorry, I was at the audits. E-permits, my apologies. The question, sorry, I was there and then I moved to audits. So the question around privacy, which is, there's been an email that's been sent to some elected members and to administration. There's no mention in the report about data purging. Talks about who has access to it and who and why they might need it, and that the all-powerful is the CEO who decides who gets to see it. But there's no mention of data purging, and that's certainly the one resident who's had key concerns over it. Can I just ask whether we purge the data, and if not, why, and whether we're able to provide some clarity on that in the next update at the next council meeting, please?
Through my call, we can certainly put an update. I'm aware of the email that came on Friday, and I'm aware that the executive manager of ICT met the member of the public already that's raised a number of issues about things like data purging. So that is something that he's dealing with. The data is held externally by a company, and we have requested that the data is purged on a regular basis. So that is an ongoing discussion. So I can't give you an answer right now, and I'm not personally dealing with it, but I'll put something in the next report.
I guess what I'd be looking for is a difference from requesting that they purge it is a guarantee and is a system as such that we know data is purged every 3 days, 27 days, whatever. So rather than just especially considering it's held externally, I think that that's a fair question for community to ask, and particularly whether it be one individual or our entire rate base. If they're asking what happens to that data, we should be able to give them clarity on it. So if we can get that in detail for next update, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just build on Councillor Toppelberg's question. Just if we could propose a method for how we can audit that those data purges are being undertaken. You know, I guess something other than just emailing them and asking them if it's been done, if there's an auditable trail of that data being purged. Thanks.
Just to confirm that the current vendors are not doing that at the moment, so that's a request. So we're pursuing that directly with the vendor to make sure that is an option and able to be done.
Any further questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Just to the director, if I can just confirm, because I'm just looking at from the briefing papers where the question was asked about infringement notices from the point in time. Is that where you've written here that to date no infringements have been issued? Is that to our date where we are at the moment?
Yeah, through my call. So I checked yesterday, and no infringements had been issued. We've issued a lot of infringements, but not for residential parking without any permits. So yeah, that's the latest position.
Anything further? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. That takes us to item 11.1, event and festival funding for 21-22. An absolute majority decision is required. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Smith, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to comment that it's great to see that we've had some really interesting and diverse applications come in for event funding for our 21-22 year. It's been tough. We've missed it. We've definitely missed events. I personally have really missed events in our community, so it's great to see. And so I support this, but I do also have an amendment that I would like to propose, but I'm happy to wait and see if anyone else.
I'll just have to go to the seconder before, and then I can come back to you. Councillor Hallett, do you wish to speak?
Only to echo Councillor Smith's comments. Great to see a lot of the activities getting underway, and hopefully we won't have any more disruption and we see them go ahead successfully. And there's a number of amendments proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Hallett. Returning to Councillor Smith now.
Thank you. So I have a proposal on the lilac. Thank you. Lilac flimsy. Thank you. Thank you to increase the allocation of funding to Town Team Centre events by 30,000 to 60,000, and to update the total funding in accordance with Amendment 1. The reason for this is that our town teams, I would say, are still yet to submit some of their event applications, and to give them more time. I just like to see that, to show the teams that we are supporting them, and by having this funding there, they'll know that they can actually put in there when they when they're ready, that they can put in their applications without being rushed. Thank you.
Councillor Fotakis, did you second the amendment?
I hadn't yet, but I raised my hand to say if you wanted to second it.
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you for being onto it.
Yeah. I'm happy to support this. I think when we look at the schedule of events over the years, our town teams have put on some substantial events and have been allocated quite a considerable amount of our events funding as a result of that. So I'm more than happy to support it, but I think we also will need to really be thinking long and hard over the next 12 months about additional ways that we can actually support our town teams as we, fingers crossed, emerge all vaccinated towards, I suppose, a much improved, but considering where we are at the rest of the world and still being able to have events, I feel very fortunate to live in this part of the world, but happy to support it.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Just a query, so the additional $30,000, where will that come from?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we currently have a projected surplus of about $100,000, $110,000. So it would reduce the city surplus, but I would formalise those financials in the mid-year review as well.
Councillors, any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Do you wish to keep going, Councillor Smith?
Thank you. I can see that there are two amendments that you have on the table. Would you like me to present those?
Yes, please, because I can't.
Thank you. We have a proposed amendment on the Buttercup, let's say. Thank you. The proposed amendment that the recommendation be amended to include allocation of $15,000 for Pride WA Pride Fair Day and update total funding in accordance with Amendment 1.
Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Hallett.
The reason is the City of Vincent is a long-term supporter of Pride. This amendment ensures that we have adequate allocation to support Pride Fair Day.
Councillor Hallett, any comments? The answer is on the blue. Yes, ask your question.
Where will the money come from?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe there is a second amendment which is to reduce the events funding by $15,000. So effectively we're reallocating it. So perhaps.
So why not a single amendment?
It was done quite late in the day and I think it just was a bit of a rush by the section, the directorate. Yeah. We can't yet. Please, I will preside. Thank you. So I just also wish to talk to this, to say that I have met with the CEO and with Pride WA board members, and it's very, very exciting that Chung Tan has been appointed as the first CEO and staff member of Pride WA, which is fantastic for the organisation. And the reason, if we went back to 2019 when we did have our last Pride Fair Day, funding from the city was $10,000 with $2,000 in kind support. But in speaking with Pride board members and Chung, I understand that they are now moving this event from a paid to a free community event, which is absolutely fantastic. They want to get as many people to come as possible, make it really inclusive, capture everyone in the local area. People who might just walk past and think, oh, what's going on? They don't want any barriers to come on down. So that's why, and in fact, Councillor Fotakis pointed out that previously we have funded Pride Fair Day when it was at Birdwood for $15,000. So they do actually need an additional allocation. And I understand that insurance has also become quite a lot more expensive, unfortunately, for events since COVID struck, and we can all understand why. So that is why $15,000. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Back to the substantive.
Apologies, I probably should have raised this amendment first. So I have a third amendment. I have no idea what colour this one is.
Aqua.
Thank you. Aqua, thank you. And this will make sense now. The proposed amendment that the recommendation be amended to remove allocation of $15,000 for Kin & Co Sunday Common event and to update total funding in accordance with Amendment 1.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Castle. Councillor Smith, do you wish to speak to it?
Thank you. The reason for this is our priority should be to fund community organisation events first, with a number of events happening in Hyde Park and the addition of Pride Fair Day in November. Hyde Park has been well catered for. Bless you, CEO.
Councillor Castle, do you wish to speak to it? Anyone wish to comment? Councillor Fotakis.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to add, it's a really important point of the intensification of Hyde Park. It's something that I raised in a briefing meeting when we were discussing events and remain concerned to make sure that it does, that Hyde Park doesn't really become, I suppose, a venue week in, week out. So, and I think Pride Fair Day as a community event, and particularly a free community event, has got to take precedence, as well as some of the other events that we fund. I was also concerned about this event really wasn't, I suppose, the community style event that we're used to funding here as well. I did have some concerns about the commercial nature of it, some aspects of it. So I'm happy to support the removal of this from our funding stream.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Any further comments? I will just briefly mention that I do feel for Kin & Co, because I think when you've had a recommendation for funding approved and then gets to council and it's withdrawn, I can understand that there may be some disappointment there, for which I do feel for them. But I hope they'll understand that when you consider that this $15,000 is effectively being transferred to Pride WA, where we have a more than 20-year relationship, an incredibly important part of our partnerships in the City of Vincent, and hopefully they'll understand how critical it is that we fund our community organisations and that we maintain those partnerships, particularly with our town teams, Pride WA, St Patrick's Day, who have over the past 2 years have had the unfortunate inability to deliver their event. These are the enduring and important connections that we have, and they are often our priority when trying to kick off events again. Right, all those in favour of the amendment? That's carried. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare that carried. Thank you. That takes us to item 12.2, report and minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 6th of July 2021. Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, no, I was thinking exactly that. I will support the officer recommendation and apologise for my earlier transgression.
Councillor Wallace. I was trying to resist the urge, but I don't know if I can, because I raised this at the briefing that I had some concerns that we were discussing effectively remuneration with community members before that was revisited by council. And the response in the briefing notes was that this was not a financial interest because it's reimbursement of expenses, which I think is just putting on the record. I think that's just because you can't pay remuneration and it has to be a sort of quasi reimbursement of expenses. And I don't know that that's a very strong rationale. So I just wanted to make that point. I'll say no more. And any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare that carried. Well, that takes us back to item 10.2, where we do have a mover and seconder. That was on the tender for the supply and laying of curbing, but we do have questions on the confidential attachment. So I do need a mover and seconder to go behind closed doors. Moved by councillor Fotakis, seconded by councillor Smith. All those in favour? I declare that carried.